Be seated. Well, any of you who have kids or work with kids or were a kid certainly know all about complaining, especially around food. The Israelites were complaining. We're hungry. We would have been better off enslaved because we had food there. And kids can complain about food all the time. There's a story going around the internet about a guy, and it became so big, it actually was picked up by major news and reporting that this guy related a story. He was in line at a fast food place, and the kid behind him and his mother, and the kid was complaining, "I want a pie. Why do we have to wait so long? I want my pie." And he was swearing, and he was calling his mother names, and he was playing a video console, and every time something went wrong in the game, he was swearing, and he was throwing it. And the person kind of said, "Excuse me, ma'am, you mind?" And mom was just looking at her phone, just tuning out her son the whole time. And he reported that he actually said something politely, he says, to the woman about the behavior of the son, and she laid into him and said, "Don't tell me how to raise my child." Well, the guy reported that when he got to the counter, he asked, "How many pies do you have?" "You're right." He said, "23. He says, "I will take them all." He bought all the pies, ate one in front of the mom and kid, and then left with them. Some might say, "Way to go," and many rose to say, "Way to go, guy." Others said that was cruel. It was his form of justice, his form of thinking of this kid getting what he thought he deserved. That the kid was complaining, and complaining types shouldn't get what they want. Well, the Israelites were complaining, and God fortunately did not act like this guy. And God gave them quails that came and manna, this stuff that would form on the ground. Now, I don't know how thankful I'd be if it says, "Look, go scrape this stuff off the ground. It's all yours to eat." But that's exactly what happened. This manna covered the ground, and they were able to pick it up and use it to eat, and even make little cakes out of them and eat it. And it was sustenance, and they were able to get enough. And they were only able to get, other scriptures relate that they were only able to get enough. They couldn't take too much, so you could work to get more and more, but it was like only a certain amount, the same amount for each person was able to be gathered, and everything else would spoil, and they would have to get and do it again the next day to get more. But they had enough, and they were given food. Sometimes I know I complain just as much as my kids. I'll stand in front of the refrigerator and say, "We have nothing to eat. Let's eat out." It's easy to do, and of course we have plenty to eat. And in fact, we have practiced before this practice called Eat Your Pantry, where you don't buy new food, and you have to go through your pantry and figure out what you can fix with from your pantry and eat it and use it and get it down. Of course, I think you're allowed to buy like fresh vegetables and things like that, but as far as the imperishables, eating your pantry, eating it down, and not being allowed to buy anything until you eat through your pantry. Good practice. Continued on that, because that can be hard to do that's like a once-in-a-while thing, is Frugal Friday, where you don't buy anything on Friday and you're forced to use whatever you already have in your cupboards and just make meals from what you have. And you realize, wow, we do have enough. I'm just not very creative about what I see in the refrigerator. My wife's much better than that. And we do have plenty of food to feed ourselves and our kids. Sometimes we just still feel like we don't have enough. We're plagued by the sense that we need more. We don't have enough. Whether it's food, whether it's things, whether it's space, whether it's your iPhone, whatever it might be. Well, the Israelites, we read here, were given enough. They were given and forced into a time of simplicity and equity, that everyone got the same. And learning what was enough for them was part of their process as they wandered in the desert. Learning what really was enough, it was like this grand reset for them to realize that they didn't need as much as they thought they might. In Egypt, they were not all the same. Yes, they were enslaved, but even within their people, there were different levels of what they did and how much they got and how much they enjoyed. And so some were richer than others, and yet as they all left, they all were reset into one people, all dependent on God. It was this grand reset for them to realize that God gives them what they need. That would be hard. It's hard for us to think about. There are grand imbalances in the world, and a great amount of complaining about those imbalances. We just witnessed the result of some of that complaining in this vote that Scotland took for independence. That many in Scotland complain that the United Kingdom is not so united. That Scotland has gotten the short end of the stick, haven't been given enough of the resources that are taken from Scotland, or whatever, a long list of complaints about why Scotland should be free and why London, why Westminster had not been fair to Scotland. And so many turned out to vote, and while more people voted to stay within the United Kingdom than to leave, it was not a blowout. It was a lot of people voting to say, it's been too unfair, let's be our own people. There are imbalances in the world. In inequality, today, much of the world is seeing marching for climate, so for the world to act on reversing climate change, or at least ceasing some of the practices that have been attributed to climate change. That the world and we as a people are out of balance with nature and the world. That we are consuming too much, that we are burning too much and polluting too much, and need to stop and be more in balance. And yet in there is complaining from countries that said, you first world countries, you industrialized countries, you got to pollute all you want as you built your riches, and now you're telling us we can't. And so there's a lot of complaining about fairness and justice and there, but yet we are seeing climate change and seeing a great deal of irrationality about the science that's coming out, irrational response to science is coming out about that. And yet, behind it all, there's also a greed. And a greed that blinds us from being able to deal fairly and to respond in good measure. And of course, income equality has been the topic as the gap between wealthy and poor becomes wider and wider, and the middle class shrinks, and living wages is being discussed, and the minimum wage is being debated about what is fair and what is needed for people. What is the justice in these situations? What is right? What is true? What is the justice in these situations? That is even up for debate as people have different philosophies. Some argue that they earn what they make, and people are all starting on the same place and need to earn what they make in the free market, and that is just. Others long to see a sort of a reset where people are limited to what they can take in and need. What's fair? What is fair in this world? I'm sure we would all have a different opinion. What does God say about fairness and about justice? We'll read from Matthew chapter 20, 1 through 16, about what Jesus said in this parable about the workers in the vineyard. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle. in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go in the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only an hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Well, that isn't fair. It really isn't fair. I feel the same way if I had been working all day and then somebody came in at 5 and got the same amount that I did. That doesn't line up with justice at all. It's not fair. What is God doing? What is Christ saying about the kingdom of heaven? He says, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. This is what the realm of God is like. That some who would come last would receive the same as those who came first. Interestingly enough, we're beginning to raise money for this window of Jesus knocking at the door, and I've been perplexed and asked, did they mean to put the omega before the alpha in the windows? That's an omega, which is the last letter in the Greek alphabet, and in the right panel is an alpha, which is the first letter in the Greek alphabet. I am the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. Well, I guess maybe it's about this passage. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. Or maybe it was a mistake. What is clear here? Well, is Jesus laying out an economic policy? First, that's what we have to ask. Is he talking, this is how the new economic policy should be? Is he describing this, though, as an image, the realm of heaven, the realm of God, and the way of God to be more than just simply an economic policy? What is Jesus talking about? It's not a literal story about what vineyard workers how they should be treated. What is the wage, then, you have to look at that Jesus is referring to? Is it literal wages of money, of stuff, of material? Is that what Jesus has come to promise, material wages? I think we have to be careful about how we apply this story, because what Jesus is promising is much more than any material. He's the same person who said, what you store up will rot on earth. And don't live your life for stuff. Live your life for the things that cannot be destroyed. So what is the wage that the kingdom of God and the realm of God promise us? Is God himself, is the presence of God, is the freedom that God gives us, is the grace and love that God gives us. This is the wage. This is what Christ is calling to people, is to break free from that which has put them in bondage, which includes materialism, to be free. And to understand that what God offers is much more than the trappings of this world, to break free from the sin, the way we miss the mark, the way we get lost, the way we get confused, the way we get caught up in patterns, in greed, and in lust, and in addiction, to break free from these things that would imprison us, and to know the freedom and love and grace of God. So we don't want to reduce what the wage that Christ talks about is, that we are being given a great gift. that God is not saying this is justice. God is saying this is God overturning justice. This is God fulfilling justice and giving all of who God is to us, even when we don't deserve it. Even if we've come in at the last minute and saying, you can be free. You can know God. You can know that freedom. This is a story of compassion. This is a story that changes our lives and comes into our lives. And even if we haven't earned something, even if we haven't deserved or feel deserving of God's love, God's saying, yes, I do love you. And I do call you to be my people. Even if you feel imperfect or you don't feel pure or you don't feel righteous or you don't feel like you've lived the life that God would call. It's a story of compassion and saying, yeah, maybe in a justice-only world that would be true. But it's not just a justice-only world. That God is inserted compassion so that we don't get what we deserve. And we don't live in a world where everyone gets what they deserve. We live in a world in the realm of God where everyone is extended compassion and love. And that changes how we live. And that calls us to live lives that reflect God's compassion. To understand that not everyone starts at the same level, that not everybody has had the advantages that we have, that we have to look at people with compassion and extend that compassion to others. Because we have enough. We have enough, and we have the ability to say, enough is enough. Enough is enough with the inequality in the world. Enough is enough with the rampant greed in the world. Enough is enough with the poverty in the world, and to go out and act compassionately. The Presbyterian Church has done that traditionally since its beginning. John Calvin, who influenced John Knox, who began the Presbyterian Church, was adamant about free public education. And that's still a value that we honor and believe in as a church today, to make sure that all people have access to education. It's part of our challenge offering this month. Presbyterians have opened hospitals. When they saw so many were not receiving any care at all, they opened hospitals. There are still hospitals with the name Presbyterian. And as the governorship of those hospitals has changed and kind of distanced from the church itself, still carry the name Presbyterian, reflecting their history as being started by those who had compassion, who wanted to start and provide that health care to others. And the church is still continued in discussions. And how do we continue to make sure that there is access to health care for all? This church was involved with Stony Brook in providing a place for seniors and the aging to be able to age with dignity and to grow and be cared for and know that they would be cared for. And some of you are involved with Housing First of Corvallis and looking for ways that we can help people who are down and out and on the road towards independence and health. Yes, personally, we can all get involved. We can get involved and be compassionate to one another. Corporately, as a church, we work at ways to be compassionate with each other and to advocate a compassionate world. Because God first is compassionate with us. And God first reaches into our lives, in our complaining, in our feeling like we don't have enough, in the way that we feel entitled, or the way we feel injustice. And God comes into our lives and says, you have enough with me. Trust and walk with me. Receive compassion and be a compassionate person. So when you're in that line with that screaming child, rather than buying all the pies and saying, I got you, maybe think about what kind of life that parent might lead. What they've tried and failed to do, what they've tried and what they might be feeling. To have compassion, not knowing what their life is about. And maybe instead of buying all the pies and taking them, maybe extend the kind of thing God might do. Maybe you buy all the pies, or maybe just one. Say, here's your pie. God bless you. Amen.